Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing ghost stories from the state of Montana. Let's get into it. Story 1. I visited Montana for the first time in June of 2004. I would later move there from my home state of Connecticut and live in both eastern and western parts of the state for 9 years. My friend picked me up from Billings Airport and suggested that we see the battlefield. He was a bit of a history buff. When we arrived, we were driving along the road past the visitor center. I got very quiet, suddenly feeling very heavy and serious. We got to a point in the road that looked down some rolling prairie. We decided to get out and walk. My friend, a Montana native, didn't seem to be disturbed very much, but as I looked down into the coulees and saw the white stone markers bunched together closely, I became overwhelmed with terror and deep sadness. I knew that the people who died in that area had been trying to hide and were unable to defend themselves. I could almost see it. I tried telling this to my friend and he seemed perplexed. I started to cry and couldn't stop. It alarmed my friend and he decided we should leave. We left the park and pulled over for a few minutes and I started to calm down. I couldn't explain my experience to someone that had never felt those things, and it was a little embarrassing. It is not the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last that I encounter an intense residual like that. A word of advice to any empaths or sensitives visiting the battlefield: ground yourself well before entering, or prepare to be overwhelmed with the emotions of these unfortunate souls. Story 2. I served as a volunteer firefighter at the Smith Valley Volunteer Fire Department in Kalispell, Montana, for about 3 years before I moved to Washington, and I have had many encounters there as well as other firefighters, although most of the staff who previously worked there thinks of the afterlife as nonsense due to, and understandably, dealing with death regularly in dismissed mind and a couple other stories. What I myself have experienced and have no other explanation for. I believe the building was built in 2006, and it's right off of Highway 2. As far as I know, it was not built on any Indian burial grounds or anything like that. Many people have come and gone there since it is a very mentally and physically challenging job. You don't ever think of anything being paranormal unless you are alone in the station itself. Incident 1. The first encounter I had was when I had a scheduled shift there and I had baked a frozen pizza in the upstairs kitchen. It was headed to one of the recliners when I heard footsteps on the roof, walking in the same path I was walking, and when I stopped, so did it. I thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, so I sat down in the chair and turned on the TV, and the footsteps on the roof started to pace back and forth above me. So I got up, walked over toward the door, stood there listening, and the footsteps walked over toward me and started pacing back and forth above me again. So that was when I first noped right out of the living room, down the stairs, and spent the rest of the day in the computer room in the fire engine bay. Incident 2. It was a week before we were hosting a rummage sale at the fire station, and me and my best friend had brought a washer and dryer set, as well as other miscellaneous things for the sale, into the back of the bay area, when we both heard the loud murmuring of what sounded like some men arguing. But when we started walking towards the stairway of a storage area to where the sound was coming from, you could hear shh, shh, like whoever it was up there didn't want us to hear them, and then silence. I went up the stairs to investigate the sounds, and once again I was the only one in the area. Creeped out, I finished unloading the rest of the stuff, and we hopped into my pickup truck and took off after locking up. Even my friend, who didn't at the time believe in anything paranormal, had no explanation for that. Incident 3. I had been telling my roommate, Daniel, name change for privacy, about the happenings at the fire station, and he wanted to go there and experience it too. So feeling brave, I said, screw it, let's go see if we can get anything to happen. Not much did happen as we're walking around the whole building until we got into the kitchen area downstairs. There are two kitchen areas, one for the community area and another for the living quarters, and we were downstairs in the community area. When we heard stuff moving around, a coughing sound coming from a locked storage closet, and of course, when I unlocked the closet to see what was in there, there was only cleaning supplies and a mop bucket. Neither of us liked that, so we headed to my car to start it up and get warm since it was winter time. And I took a couple extra minutes to lock up the building and turn off all the lights before we left. As I got into the car and I started to back out of the parking space in front of the kitchen area, we both saw the lights in the kitchen turn back on when I knew nobody else but me and him were there. So I tore out of the parking lot and didn't go back until an emergency call a couple days later. Incident 4. After the many things I've had happen here, most small stuff like locked doors opening up, doors that were supposed to be shut opening on the fire trucks, the above stories, etc., I refused to stay the night there again. But I brought my at the time girlfriend Karen down to the station one evening to give her a tour. A few minutes into walking into the station, one of the extension cords hanging from the ceiling plugged into a truck to keep the truck's batteries charged up popped out of the socket, echoing in the bay. It started swinging back and forth as if somebody had just yanked it out and needed to yank with some force to get those to come out. She yelped and ran over to me, and I said, "All right, time to leave." So we started walking toward the door when we heard shuffling coming up behind us really fast. So we bolted out the door, locked it, and took off. Of course, I had one more shift to spend there, which goes into my next story. Incident 5. I had brought a buddy from a different fire department onto my department, and since he was now probationary, he had mandatory shifts to work there, and I decided to also work a shift with him one night. This night being the final straw of me staying overnight there again. Ronald and everybody else thought that what I explained to them was nonsense, and that ghosts don't exist. Well, this night changed his perspective of this. I was hanging out in the computer room, and he was upstairs in the living room, when he came downstairs and quietly sat in the chair across from me, with a really puzzled look on his face. I said, "I don't understand. I keep hearing what sounds like boots coming up the stairs, and a shadow of somebody standing at the door, but when I open it up, there's nobody there." Me not wanting to get more freaked out than I already was, I just changed the subject, and we talked about other things to kill some time. Well, it was getting late, and I was tired, so I decided to go upstairs and get ready for bed, and Ronald was going to watch TV and probably fall asleep on the couch in the living room on the other side of the bedroom I was sleeping in. I was in bed going on my phone when the door opened up a little bit, and a shadow of somebody came quietly walking in and walked over toward the window and stood there with his hands behind his back looking out the window. Seeing the TV on through the half-open door, I said, "Ronald, what are you doing? Dude, you're being a creep. Come on, man." No answer. Anyway, annoyed, I got up out of bed while still staring at the shadow. When I turned on the light, and the shadow of a man was no longer there, vanished as soon as I turned on the light. I quickly peeked my head out the door, and Ronald was fast asleep. I spent the rest of the night on the other couch, with all the lights upstairs turned on. I asked him a couple of weeks later if he had any other weird things happen there, and he said one night he was getting ready for bed, and happened to look outside the window before closing the blinds, and he saw two men dressed in suits, standing in the parking lot, standing side by side, looking up at him. He went downstairs quickly to confront the men, and found nobody outside. Checked the security camera the next day, and not a single person was recorded walking through the parking lot. To my knowledge, nobody has died in the building, but we have had a couple of firefighters pass on previously, and their firefighter helmets are hung high up on the wall in honor of them. There are also a few crosses on both sides of the highway in front of the building, so this could also contribute to the activity. Story 3. A little background before I start. I come from a Native American family, and this story takes place when I was 13. I used to like riding my dirt bike out in the hills. I'd usually be out for hours, always returning when the sun started to go down. On this one particular trip, I was cruising along the top of a flat hill in the summer sun. Ahead of me, about 30 or so feet, I saw something shining. As I got closer, I saw it was a medallion-type necklace. It was beaded with metallic parts along the threads. I thought it looked cool, so I took it home. This turned out to be a big mistake. I had the medallion in my dresser, and I didn't bother to tell anyone about it. The night after I found it was when things started to go bad. I was lying in my bed on my side, trying to fall asleep. Then I felt as if someone lied down next to me. I felt whatever it was lean in closer and start breathing really hard into my ear. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't want to move nor look at whatever was behind me, so I screamed, and within a few seconds, my dad burst into my room. I was crying, and he was mad that I woke him up. He asked what the hell I was screaming for, and I told him there was somebody in my room. He didn't believe me and told me to get back to bed. I didn't sleep at all that night. Over the next few days, similar things happened, and sometimes I would catch glimpses of something pacing around outside the windows at night. Then on the last day, my grandpa came over to visit while my parents were out. He asked me how things had been, and I told him what's been happening. He put his coffee down and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "What did you do?" Obviously, I was surprised he would suspect me, but then I remembered the medallion. I told him about it and he got pissed. He was yelling and cussing at me, telling me I shouldn't take stuff like that because it didn't belong to me. Just then, a heavy pair of antique handcuffs that were on the wall flew across the room and almost hit me. So I grabbed the medallion, got on my dirt bike, and went back to where I found it. It was difficult, but I was finally able to locate where I had found it. I laid it down, said a prayer, and apologized to whoever owned it, then made my way back home. Things were calmer at the house, so I knew I did something right. My grandpa was still upset with me, but he was glad I put it back. Now I know better than to take someone else's property, whether they're alive or not. Story 4. My story is of a night maybe 3 or 4 days after I messed around with a Ouija board. I know it's not a toy, and I didn't look at it as such, nor did I mess with it like it was. Okay, so here's my story. I should also mention before you read on that this took place in 2007, I believe. So I don't quite remember the date of this night, but I do remember the time like it was just last night. It was about 12 a.m., and I was just getting ready for bed, as I had school the next morning. I owned a bunk bed, and so I climbed to the top bunk. I liked it up there. As I lay there trying to fall asleep, I began thinking of the day's events. I don't remember them now as they were passing thoughts. I glanced at the clock, which read 12:31 a.m., so I closed my eyes to try and fall asleep again, and that's when I heard someone at my door. It was locked, pounding and trying to get in. The doorknob was being rattled as if whoever was on the other side was angry. I heard what sounded like a man's voice on the other side, and I didn't move an inch when it first happened. At first I thought it was my mother, drunk and wanting in, but something inside me told me not to move until it was over, so I stayed frozen as whoever it was tried to get in. After I heard the man's voice, a gruff and growly grunt, I heard a young woman's voice scream in what seemed to be agony or fear. I listened to that scream for about 5 minutes before it stopped. It was done and over with. Nothing after she screamed. It ended. So I got up out of bed, flicked the lights on quickly, and unlocked and opened my door and looked around. At the time, it was 1 in the morning, and no one was awake. The whole house was dark and quiet. It really creeped me out, and I felt really scared, but I'd gone back into my room and fell asleep after a half hour finally. The next day, I'd asked my parents if they were awake, and they heard anything that night. They all told me they weren't awake and that no one heard anything. Story 5. Ever since I was 10, I've noticed weird things that a normal 10-year-old would not notice or see. I was 10 when I first saw my first spirit. I was visiting my grandmother for the summer, my first summer away from my family. It was a couple of weeks, and one night, something weird happened. It was about 10:30 when I went to bed. My grandmother went to go to bed, and she always closes my door. I went to sleep in the guest room. Around 11, she went to sleep. About at midnight, I was sleeping and I got a sense I was being watched. I opened my eyes and there was an older gentleman about in his late 70s, and he was wearing a suit like it was 1800s clothing, nothing like what people were wearing. Now this was in 2005 in Astoria, Oregon. I looked at for a few seconds. He was standing in my grandmother's doorway looking down the hall at my grandmother's room. He told me to watch my grandmother. She was in danger. I got scared. Knew it wasn't an evil spirit. It had a calm sense like he knew her, but I got scared. What 10-year-old wouldn't be scared? I hid under my covers for 5 to 10 seconds, and I looked up again. He was gone, and the door was closed, and the presence of someone was gone. I told my grandmother the next morning, and she said that was her grandfather. He always watched out for her, and he was just wondering who was in her house. This was the first time I was visiting her. A couple days later, we were driving to the beach, and she took her medicine right before we left. I was looking out the window when I saw him, the man who visited me a couple nights before, and he pointed down the road. I saw my grandmother sleeping at the wheel, and a huge truck roaring down the highway. I quickly grabbed the wheel and drove away from the truck. I pulled the emergency brake and we stopped 6 miles from Seaside, Oregon. I woke her up and told her everything. It was so scary. Then in 2006, in Chinook, Montana, I was walking home from school and I saw this girl hiding behind a tree. I was asking her why she was so shy. She came out and she had a scar on her face and scratches on her arms. She said her name was Elizabeth. I invited her to my house, not knowing the difference of a ghost and a real person. I asked my mother if I could have a friend over. She said, sure, where is she? I said, right here. She told me no one is here. I argued with her and I went to my room. Elizabeth followed. We were at dinner the same night. My father came home from an accident. He was a police officer and I told him about my new friend, Elizabeth. He started to cry and told me that a 14-year-old died in the accident named Elizabeth that afternoon, about when I walked home. Now I am 17 and spirits keep following me and watching me, begging me to help them, even though I don't know what they want. Even a demonic spirit named John, and he keeps messing everything up, and he won't leave me alone. I need help. I am terrified of him, and he tells me scary things that are evil and horrifying things that a 17-year-old girl should not hear. He even tells me I'm going to die young. It makes me paranoid to even go out of the house. I have done research, but I need help getting rid of the other spirits and him. I also can sense auras and feel that what other people feel in their souls, and I also know what is wrong with people because I feel their pain. I also have a woman named Kate. She claims to be my mother in a past life and tells me what to do, or she will punish me for being a bad daughter. She also has a little girl following her around named Haley. She is 5 years old and she always plays little tricks on me or makes things fall. This is my ghost story that no one knows. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.